Hi, welcome to this Google Product Manager mock interview. My name is Anika, and I used to be a PM at Google, where I worked on a number of teams, including YouTube, Google Search, and Maps. Today, I will be playing the role of interviewer, and my candidate is Akshat.
Hi, I'm Akshat. I was also a former product manager at Google, where I worked on messages and Google Stadia, and I've done hundreds of mock interviews.
In this mock interview, we want to show you what it's like to really ace your Google interview. So let's get started. Akshat, no pressure. The question I'd like to ask you today is, how would you improve Google Chrome?
Awesome. So, I guess my first question would be, what do you mean by improve? Are there specific things that we're optimizing for? So, for example, our goal could be to increase our user acquisition. It could also be to increase how often people use Google Chrome, or maybe improve how satisfied they are with the product. Did you have a particular goal in mind?
It's really important to ask clarifying questions, both so that you can make sure that you're on the same page as the interviewer, as well as so that you can scope the question into something that is feasible to solve during the course of the interview. So when Akshat asks the interviewer what they mean by improve, that's a really great way to kind of narrow down the problem space and understand specifically what the question is asking, or at least one version of what can be talked through in the course of this interview. Yeah, that's a good point. It's definitely a broad question. I'd actually love to hear your suggestions for what metrics you think would be most important for Google Chrome to improve.
Okay. I think there's probably at a high level, maybe 3 or 4 different goals that we could have, and I'll talk through each of those. So to start, there's user acquisition. And I think a common metric for this is just what are the number of daily active users, monthly active users, et cetera, for the product. And I think it could be interesting to talk about acquisition if our goal is to increase the market share of Google Chrome as a product and bring it to more and more different kinds of user segments. Another goal or metric, North Star metric that we could have is engagement with the product. Things that we could look at to this end are how often are people using the product, what's the average amount of time they're spending on the product every day or every week, etc. We can also look at user satisfaction, and there's a couple of different ways that we could measure user satisfaction. We could look at CSAT, or customer satisfaction scores. We could look at net promoter scores, and a host of other sort of user satisfaction metrics, like we could look at Help Center or other places where bugs and tickets are filed. And then another thing that we could look at is monetization, right? Are we monetizing the product well? What's the average revenue per user, roughly? So amongst those, I think for me, what would be most important is making sure that the satisfaction of using Google Chrome is high. There's a lot of other competitors out there now, and I think Google Chrome already has significant market share. So it's important to make sure that user satisfaction is high so it continues to be one of the leading web browsers.
One great way to show the interviewer that you're kind of thinking 2 steps ahead is to proactively suggest different options, or at least, what you think might be the best option for the clarifying questions you ask. This not only helps you take the question down a path that you feel might be best, but it also shows the interviewer that, you have in mind what a great way to talk through this might look like, and that you're thinking about that ahead of time. Awesome. I think that makes sense. User satisfaction seems like a very relevant thing to look at for Chrome improvement. Before you kind of get into it, could you talk through what the metric for actually measuring that user satisfaction improvement might be?
For sure. So I think there's a couple of different ways we could gauge how satisfied users are with the product. We could run actual surveys. 2 very common formats for this are calculating this customer satisfaction score, or CSAT, and then the net promoter score. Both of them give you an idea of how satisfied users are with your product, and NPS goes even a step further and also can sort of measure how delighted your users are and if they would actually be advocates or promoters for your product. For something like this, I would probably stick with a metric like CSAT, just because people are usually not promoting, this is the browser I use. There might be some power users, but what we're really looking for is making sure that most of our users are very satisfied so that they continue using Chrome versus they adopt it for the first time.
Okay, great. That makes sense. So feel free to continue talking through what those improvements would look like.
Okay, cool. So our goal is to basically make sure that customer satisfaction remains high. I think the first thing we should do is probably segment our user base. And one way that I would segment all the different Chrome users, Chrome is a huge product. It's got billions of users and they're all sort of different use cases and different personas. But one way that we could sort of stratify the user base is really just by how much they use Chrome. I think there's probably 3 segments that I would look at. One is the power users, and these users really spend almost their whole day in the browser. Examples of such power users are knowledge workers. So a lot of people who are spending time on the computer and on the browser for their day job. This middle segment would be, casual users or middle users. So people who are using the browser for leisure, maybe just casually surfing the internet semi-frequently. And then finally, the tail segment would be light users. So these may be users who are just infrequently using Chrome, maybe just infrequently using the web, right? So I suspect probably older populations or populations in areas with less connectivity. So in terms of where we should focus our time, I think for light users, since we're not focusing on acquisition or activation, they're probably not the right people to focus on because improving their CSAT scores is not going to be super relevant to keeping sort of our most high value users on the platform. I would recommend starting with focusing on power users. These are the users for whom like every little adjustment in Chrome makes a huge difference. This is where they're spending all their time. And so having them be advocates for the product or having a really good experience is a good way to make sure that Chrome remains like one of the leading web browsers.
Spending time segmenting your users and thinking about how different types of users might act and what those user journeys might look like is very, very crucial to answering a product design question. The reason is because different users have different needs, and you want to make sure that you are building specifically for the needs of the users you're focusing on. The danger, of course, is that if you kind of go off of your own assumptions or if you don't take time to walk through this and understand these nuances, you might build a product that users don't actually need or want to use. Awesome. This all sounds good so far.
Cool. Okay, so then I guess I'll move into talking about some ways that we could improve the CSAT scores for power users. Does that sound good?
Yeah, looking forward to hearing your ideas.
Okay, cool. So I'm personally a power user of Chrome, so I'll basically draw on my own personal experience and that of people I work with. I think the key pain points that I have as a user of Chrome, I think there's maybe 2 of them. One of them is around Chrome's power usage. We've all had the notification that Chrome is using a significant amount of memory or battery power, and my computer definitely gets drained a lot faster when Chrome is open. I imagine for power users who always have Chrome on and probably have a lot of tabs open, this is a significant problem. So that's one sort of category that we could look at. And the second one is productivity. So because we are using this, user segment is using Chrome for work, it's really important that Chrome help them be as productive as possible. You don't want to spend your day fighting Chrome. You want to spend it actually working on things that you care about. I think between those two, I'm probably going to focus on the latter. So let me think about features that would help me personally be more productive within Chrome. Does that sound good?
Sounds great. Yeah, feel free to keep going.
Okay, cool. So when I think about, as a user, how I'm using Chrome, there's a couple of things that come to mind. Usually I've got a lot of different tabs open, and that's one big pain point. I'm usually looking for the right tab to open or navigating through multiple windows and tabs. Another thing that I use Chrome for is, managing my email and my meeting calendar. Those are tabs that I always have open, and Chrome is sort of like my central operating system. So based on this, there's a couple of feature ideas that come to mind. The first is a universal search feature. So my use case here is that, I'm using Chrome. I've got a lot of tabs open and I'm trying to find a very specific document. I don't know if the document's already open in a tab. If it is, I'd like to just go to navigate to that tab. And if it's not, I'd like to open a new tab. Right now, this is pretty painful. In order to find it, I usually have to scan through all the different open tabs. And this gets hard when there's a lot of tabs because you can't see, what the tab is actually called. You can just see the icon. Usually the document I'm looking for is like a Google Drive document, right? If I'm a power user of Chrome, then it's also likely that I might be using G Suite. And if I don't find the Google Drive folder or the Google Drive document, then what I currently have to do is I have to go to Google Drive, open that up in a new tab, pick, what kind of document I'm looking for. Is it docs? Is it sheets? Is it slides? Then I have to search for the thing that I'm looking for and then actually open that up. In the process of doing that, I'm adding 2 or 3 new tabs and it's taking me 4 or 5 steps to just open a document. And then the final thing that I can do is I can look through my history. This is something that I personally don't do that often. And I would imagine that users aren't looking through their history that often. But even if you do, you have to navigate to the history tab, and then you have to sort of look through all your history to find the Google Drive thing that you're looking for. So one way that we can save the user a lot of time and make them more productive is by having sort of a universal search bar. And what this search bar would do is it would essentially look at 3 different places, the 3 different places we talked about. First, it'll look through your open tabs to see if any of them match the document that you're looking for. They would also look through your Google Drive, and there's a lot of things we could do here to make that really fast. You could have your Google Drive sort of cached so that it's extremely fast right now, or which it isn't right now, rather. And then it'll also look through your history. You could invoke the universal search bar through maybe a keyboard shortcut. So you can imagine, maybe you press a keyboard shortcut and you type in the name of the document or like a keyword, right? So if I'm looking for sales leads, right, just type in sales leads and it brings up all the relevant things in my open tabs, in my Google Drive, and in my history. And so with that, the goal is to basically make it as easy as possible for someone to get to a document that they're looking for. So that would be one feature idea, basically a universal search bar. Another feature idea I have is, I use Google Chrome to look at all my emails and also to manage my schedule. One pain point is, oftentimes I'm working in Google Chrome and before I know it, I'm 5 minutes late to a meeting. I think this is something that's happened to a lot of us. What I would love is for Google Chrome to be able to send me a notification that says, hey, your meeting's starting. And that notification just includes a link to join the meeting, whether I'm using, Zoom or Google Meet or any other video conferencing platform. It would be great if instead of having to juggle all those, I just have a single place to join my meeting. What I imagine this would look like for the user is if, Google Chrome already lets you create a Chrome profile where you can log in with your email and your calendar. I think for people who are using Google Calendar, which is probably a significant portion of the Chrome user base, Google Chrome can basically get access to your calendar and send you a notification before your meeting's about to start. And in your Google Calendar, there's already a field for each event for, what's the video conferencing link. So maybe Google Chrome could essentially intelligently figure out, like, based on what the meeting conferencing link is, what conferencing platform it's using, it'll just automatically do the legwork to, log me into that. So the end user experience would be, you can keep working in Google Chrome, working on docs, looking at the internet, and then when it's time for a meeting, you'll get a notification from Chrome with a link to join, without having to sort of find your calendar amongst all the open tabs or find your email and keep checking that. And I think the last feature that comes to mind is really around sort of managing a lot of open tabs. I know that Google Chrome introduced a couple of new features around tab management recently, where you can create groups of tabs and you can even pin certain important tabs. I think these are great. I think there's probably a lot more that Google could do, especially with its capabilities in AI and machine learning. The goal here would really be to reduce the cognitive overload for users. I think we've heard so many people, talking about, like, it feels so good to close that last tab, or it's so annoying to have so many different tabs open. So I think we can have a much healthier and more delightful experience for users by sort of smartly managing their tabs for them. So I imagine some sort of like ML-based model that automatically surfaces tabs that the user navigates to frequently, right? So your email and your calendar might be such tabs. There's a lot of times we just have open tabs for things, maybe things that we searched on the internet but are no longer going to look at. Imagine something that automatically kind of cleans those up, so you don't have this constant, stream of tabs that you're no longer using. I imagine for like the end user, the way this would work is it could be a setting in Chrome, like a smart tab manager that you could toggle on and off. And once it's on, it sort of learns over time based on certain signals, right? So figuring out which of your tabs are the most looked at tabs, which of them are never looked at again, right? So this could just be like search results pages that, you look at once, but then they're not looked at again. Maybe if you're a developer that's like Stack Overflow, you want to keep those tabs open, right? Maybe if you're, a marketing person, HubSpot or Salesforce or whatever SaaS tools you're using, it keeps those open. But there's probably a lot of insight into, or that Google has, that could help someone manage those better.
It's great to have multiple examples as long as you can be concise and clear about them, because it allows you to show the interviewer that you can think broadly and have both maybe more simple, easy to implement, feasible ideas, as well as maybe a little more out of the box, creative ideas, and that all of these are within your spectrum of how you think about product solutions.
Okay, so just to summarize, there's 3 features that I talked about. I talked about universal search, and the goal here is to help people get to where they want to go faster. The second is meeting notifications. The goal here is to have people spend less time in their actual calendar tab and to basically join meetings faster with less distractions. And then tab management, which is reduce cognitive overhead for people, reduce the number of tabs that they have open, and just overall make it a healthier experience to work inside Google Chrome.
When you get to the end of describing your ideas and your possible solutions, it's really helpful to just provide a quick summary of what each of those ideas were and what the impact of each of those ideas might be for your user base. Awesome. I think these all sound great. I can certainly identify with the need for all of these, especially tab management. So I'm all for improving Google Chrome from that perspective. But for the purpose of taking a more objective look at the question, how would you prioritize amongst these 3 features? Let's say, you had to start building next week. How would you decide which of these 3 to start out with?
Yeah. So I think the criteria I would use to prioritize these, there's a few. The first I would look at is how much time could this actually save for users, right? If our end goal is to make the users more productive, then my question would be which of these ideas actually will save users the most amount of time, right? And my assumption here would be the more time we save users, the more it'll improve our CSAT scores, which is sort of our North Star metric and the overall goal that we're building towards. The second criteria I would look at is the applicability across sort of our user base. How many users would this actually apply to? And then finally, I would look at what's the cost to build. Is there anything that's particularly prohibitive or hard from a technology standpoint? And sort of taking that into consideration. So based on those three criteria, if I think about the different features that I suggested. So for universal search, I imagine this will save someone a lot of time. If I just think about like personally how much time I spend looking for the right tab, it's probably significant, especially just given the number of times I perform that action. So my guess here is that it's probably the potential for saving a user time is quite high. And so I would rate that highly. It's also pretty applicable across the user base. I think it applies even more to people who are G Suite users. But because we are talking about Chrome, I think it's safe to assume that a lot of people are G Suite users, or at least a significant portion of the user base. The second idea, meeting notifications, I think this will also save someone time. I think it would depend on how many meetings they have. So I think for people who have a lot of meetings, this would be particularly useful, but it may not apply to as much of the user base. I think on average, people probably have some meetings, and then there's a set of users who have a lot of meetings throughout the day. But maybe this would only be super useful for them. And then tab management, I think this is one of those user delight features. I think it's very applicable across the user base, but it probably doesn't save the user too much time. It again, going back to like the thesis behind the feature, it's really about reducing their cognitive burden and just making Chrome an overall more pleasant experience. It might not actually save them too much time. So I think based on those criteria, the universal search is probably the most compelling from a user standpoint, just given that it has the potential to save users a lot of time, and it's also applicable across the whole user base. In terms of cost to build, because Google is sort of a leader in search already, I imagine that a lot of the infrastructure for building this kind of feature is there, or at least a lot of the know-how is there. And that could be something that is that we could take advantage of. So I think to summarize, I would probably prioritize building the universal search bar first because it has the most potential to save users time. It applies to the most users, and the cost to build is reasonable, and if not, at least as much as the other ideas.
It's very important to be data-driven about how you define this prioritization process. And just like Akshat did, you want to define your criteria for weighing features against one another upfront so that you can have a clear, very data-driven approach to how you make that decision. Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. I'm just imagining looking through my own files on the Google search homepage, and that sounds like an amazing experience. So now I'm waiting for the day that actually appears on Chrome. But thanks again, Akshat. That's the end of this interview. Well done. You did an awesome job. And thanks again for being with us today.
Thanks. I had a lot of fun.
Awesome. Overall, Akshat did an amazing job with this question. And I would say the one general takeaway I would highlight from how he walked through his answer is to always communicate what you're thinking as you're walking through your solution process. So you'll notice that even when he was kind of thinking independently, he talked out loud with the interviewer and walked through that process. And that's really important so that the interviewer can understand how you come up with ideas, how you prioritize, and ultimately how you make decisions as a PM. Well, I hope this interview was helpful to everyone who's watching. Both Akshat and I are coaches on I Got an Offer. So if you have an interview coming up and you need to prepare, you can find us there and feel free to reach out. Thanks to everyone again for joining, and good luck with your interview prep.